Good evening, everybody, and apologies for a slightly delayed start, a little bit of a technical glitch. Very lucky this evening, the very first In Conversation live of 2022. We have Matthew Taylor, CBE, who's a British former political strategist and current chief executive of the NHS Confederation, having previously led the RSA, the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, in the UK for 15 years. Before that, he was appointed to Tony Blair as the head of the Number 10 Policy Unit. He's a writer, public speaker, broadcaster, been a panelist on the BBC Radio 4's Moral Maze since 2008. And he's got a new book out called Do We Have to Work? I'm holding it up to show you. Do we have to work? Good question. Matthew, welcome, and thank you so much for appearing on our show. Matthew, I thought we'd talk about your amazing career, very productive career, sort of in reverse. So you're a political strategist, and there's a bit of politics going around at the moment with our Prime Minister. Will he survive?
I think it's looking pretty difficult for him, unless Sue Gray comes up with something that is much more defensible than anything I've heard so far. I think today may only have delayed the inevitable. It's interesting. Clearly, the kind of grounds upon which you have to resign have shifted from, my days in office. I remember Peter Mandelson having to resign because he had taken a loan from another Labour MP to get a mortgage. I mean, this is getting a loan from a friend and failing to declare it. I mean, this is kind of small beer in comparison to things which seem to be acceptable now. So, but in the end, I guess the story really, I think, here is that your greatest strengths often turn out to be your greatest weaknesses. And for Tony Blair, his greatest strength was his sense of self-assuredness, that he was bold, that people who said to him, it can't be done. I remember I worked for the Labour Party, just started working for the Labour Party just after Tony became leader. And I remember Philip Gould sending over the phrase that was going to be the backdrop for the conference, and it was New Labour, New Britain. This was the first time we'd seen this phrase, New Labour. And I remember people in the office saying, oh, no, you can't get away with that. It's going to be a disaster. And similarly, when Tony wanted to change clause 4, the same thing, oh, no, that will never happen. So he successfully drove things through. He got the party to accept things you would never thought that it would have accepted. But unfortunately, that same sense of certainty, that same sense that he could achieve anything, was what he carried into his dealings in Iraq. And, actually having succeeded in Kosovo and Sierra Leone, that only underlined that kind of sense of certainty. So when people came to him around Iraq and Afghanistan and said, this is very difficult, very intractable, people have tried and failed for many, many years in these contexts. He thought, well, I've heard all this before. That's not the only thing that was going on, but he thought, I've heard all this before. I think with Johnson, similarly, that, what was his great strength was the sense that he wasn't an ordinary politician, that he didn't mind his P's and Q's, that he was a normal, fallible human being, somebody you'd want to go down the pub with. And I think that's particularly why people who never voted Conservative were willing to vote for him. Brexit obviously was a big part of it as well. But that same devil may care, I'm above the fray, I can get away with anything attitude seems now to have caught up with him. Although, to be honest, it's been kind of catching up with him throughout his career. But I think if anyone writes if Boris Johnson does go and anyone writes a Shakespearean tragedy, it will be like all Shakespearean tragedies. We will see there will be intimations in scene 1, act 1 of what's going to happen in the final closing act.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I should have said that we've got 750 people registered for this meeting, so do send in some questions. But let me ask you a second question, which is also very topical. I think they're reporting more than 400 deaths today from COVID, and COVID's been sort of sidelined by Prince Andrew and our dear Prime Minister temporarily. But do you think that the pandemic is nearing its end now, or is the Omicron variant, has it peaked, and are we going to see return to normality in 2021?
Well, those are different questions, aren't they? Has Omicron peaked? I think probably it is peaking, although, it's really important. Here we are, we're in a virtual event, but I guess if this was happening face to face, it would be happening in central London. So let's just imagine it is happening face to face in central London. It is important that we don't fall into that trap we so often fall in of assuming that because something's happening in London, it's happening everywhere. I talked to a hospital leader in Plymouth today. She's expecting the peak in a week's time. There are parts of the north where they're expecting the peak in 10 or 11 days' time, and they're still under immense pressure because of this combination of COVID patients and staff absences. So it's peaking in certain places. It's probably just about peaking in aggregate, but there are still places that are behind, and we mustn't lose focus on the challenges they're going to have. And in some ways, ironically, London benefited from the fact that it was in its most rapid acceleration over Christmas and New Year. So in terms of the impact on the other work of the NHS, because not a great deal of elective work takes place in the kind of immediate festive period. Actually, London's probably lost less momentum in terms of the backlog than other parts of the country are going to lose. So Omicron, I think, yes, it's peaked. What we don't know about Omicron is what happens now. So we've, as it were, we're judging the journey down the mountain on the same basis of the journey up the mountain. And it could be, and I sometimes do walk in mountains, that this is a mountain which is steep to walk up, but then it's slow to walk down. So we need to keep an eye on the ongoing prevalence of Omicron, because although, as we all know, patients get less sick, particularly, of course, vaccinated patients, and a lot fewer in ICU, it is still a burden on the health service, partly because of infection control. So we need to watch how slowly we come down. Now, the second part of your question was, is this the end? Well, I think most scientists believe that, judging by the way in which these kinds of viruses have worked in the past, although we don't have that much evidence to go on, probably each variant now will be weaker than the last, and we will move to this situation where COVID just becomes something which we put up with, like flu or cold or whatever. I would say this, I'd say that's probably true, but I certainly don't think that means we should not be thinking about whether or not we're ready for a fourth wave that is actually as bad as Delta or even worse. Isn't it funny? I don't know. In 2020, there was so much talk of rebuilding, building back better. And I was at the RSA at the time. We did a lot of work. We used this phrase, building bridges to the future, to describe all the work we did about how we wanted to build back better. I think we've all become so exhausted. Nobody seems to talk about this anymore. But one of the things we said when we were talking about building back better is we need to learn about resilience. So I do hope that even as we come out of Omicron, we will attend to those things which we still haven't got right. As a friend of mine said the other day, you are probably better protected as a bus passenger in Germany in terms of air filters and in terms of the quality of masks than many people in clinical settings in the NHS in this country. So one thing I would say is, given the level of uncertainty that still exists, I do hope that one thing we'll do, even if Omicron, even if the slope out of it is quite fast and we return to normal, I don't think there's much chance of government continuing with restrictions after January the 24th, 2024. But I do hope we can continue to be vigilant, because we don't actually know how this virus is going to work out, and there is still a very far from negligible risk that we might have another bad variant.
Yeah, that's good answer. Well, Michael Schwartz points out that the Southwest peak is due in 7 to 10 days. So, what may have happened in London may not reflect places exactly further afield. But there's a good question actually kind of harping back to the first issue from Rebecca Burgess Dawson. Thank you, Rebecca. She says, I work for the NHS, and I'd love to know Matthew's view on whether the public's current doubts about authority following their own rules has unfortunately extended to people's reassurance that they should have a vaccine, or whether they should trust other governmental medical advice. And if so, what should we do? You know, it's a question about undermining authority and undermining advice. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So I think, first of all, most people are decent. And I think, generally speaking, decent people don't stop behaving decently because they see other people behaving badly.
Yeah.
In fact, slightly the reverse. So I don't see that necessarily, even when we look at people in power who ought to be doing much better, that when we see them behaving badly, it gives us, those of us who are inclined to do the right thing, I don't think it leads us to do the wrong thing, possibly the reverse, actually. What I think it does have an effect on is empowering those who were not inclined to do the right thing in the first place. That's the problem with it. It's not that it leads decent people to behave badly. It legitimizes those who, for one reason or another, and that could be a lack of social responsibility, or it could be a genuine view about vaccines and the establishment and how much they can be trusted. And I think there's a very specific issue here that I have some concern about. And that is, we are requiring, of course, all health workers to be vaccinated, and the clock is ticking on that. And those of you who work in health service management know it's a big issue, a big challenge to make sure that the data is right. I think the data is terribly reliable. It's often coming to trust. So it's going through the data. Actually, the numbers of people who haven't been vaccinated is often many, many fewer than trust are being told. But they have to go through the data, and then they have to engage with people. And as we get towards the kind of hardest to reach groups, those who are most resistant for one reason or another, it becomes more difficult, more challenging. And this is, don't forget, on top of leaders who are coping with an enormous amount of extra pressure. And I'd like to come in a moment, if we can, just to kind of where the health services are going to be when we come out of Omicron. So I do worry, actually, that well, put it this way, I support the idea of mandatory vaccination. I think it's very, very difficult to explain to the public why we expect them to be vaccinated if health and care staff aren't. I think that we need better, clearer advice to trust leaders about how to deal with the challenge they've got in relation to this issue. And I think we've got to be wary of the danger of kind of, I don't know, mini Djokovic's, you know, of cause célèbres in localities around the place, of people who may, on the one hand, just be kind of hardcore anti-vaxxers, and we've seen how willing that group of people is to cause mayhem. Or there may be people who, for more understandable reasons, people who've had COVID a couple of times, who have reasons to be fearful of vaccines, or who have worked for the health service for many years, cases where the danger is it looks like it's a kind of inflexible bureaucracy beating up on a individual who may be being slightly odd, but you know, do they really deserve to lose their job? So we've got to be careful about this. The policy is right. We should stick to the timetable. But going back to the question, what is happening politically does not help with the fact that leaders may face some very difficult decisions over the next few weeks, some of which could turn into more public rows. And that is the last thing that local health service leaders need.
Yeah, and it's crazy that the whole discussion is about some party on the 20th of May last year, isn't it, really? Okay, I picked up your point about talking about, you know, the NHS for the future, and I'd really like to go there. But before I do, Humphrey Scott is our dean, actually, does a great job at the RSM. He says, staff absences have been a major problem at my trust. He works in southwest London, and the cold site's been closed. He's asking if there's geographical variations, and it kind of also leads on to the question of, I mean, is it 100,000 staff are absent at the moment? You know, that's like 5% of the whole NHS workforce is away at the moment. So what do you think about staff absences and also recruitment for the future?
Yeah. So look, a really important part of this that we need to continue to drive home is that the NHS entered this pandemic suffering from the consequences of the longest period of slow NHS spending growth that we've seen since the beginning of the NHS. So the decade of austerity saw the lowest level of growth in the NHS since its beginning, a long way below the kind of trend growth that you need in developed countries, primarily reflecting the aging of the population, but also rising health costs. And what that meant was that we entered into this, notwithstanding the problems we had with a kind of lack of preparation for pandemics themselves in terms of PPE, etc. But we entered into it with an estimated 100,000 vacancies in the NHS, nursing, general practice, and, across the board. And secondly, a capital stock in a poor and declining condition. And those two issues have damaged us as we've tried to respond, because of course, if you've got 100,000 vacancies, that's your starting point, and you then add in extra pressures, it becomes very, very difficult. And we've then added into that, in each wave, the issue of staff themselves getting this virus. And that's been particularly acute this time because Omicron is so incredibly, because it transmits so quickly and so widely. So it's so infectious. So the other issue about staff absence as well is that it's lumpy and unpredictable. And so it's a real challenge for leaders because, it's very hard to know who's going to get sick. And also, of course, if one person gets sick in the team, it's more likely that other people in that team will get sick as well. So, poor NHS leaders who have had a lot to cope with and continue to have a lot to cope with are dealing with a situation where they don't know from one day to the next what's going to happen. And it isn't evenly, it's not evenly split across the country, it's not evenly split within places, and it's not even evenly split within organizations. And so that is why you get this particular situation where a whole facility has to shut. Or, of course, you get this other problem, which is you might just have a small number of people, but they might be people who are absolutely critical in relation to the interconnected nature of a health system. So, we heard cases last week of paramedics not being available, so ambulances couldn't go out. Staff absence is a real challenge. It's always a challenge, but we've had kind of twice the normal rates during Omicron.
Do you find your job as head of the NHS Confederation a bit stressful in these stressful times, Matthew?
No, yeah, but I guess I don't have to say this to anyone in the audience tonight. There's a difference between good stress and bad stress, isn't there? So yeah, it's intense, and I spent far too much time between Christmas and New Year doing media interviews rather than spending time with my family and recharging my batteries. But I mean, number one, I always compare myself to people on the front line and realize that my life is an absolute doddle in comparison to people working in the health service and in care system at the front line right now. And secondly, I love the job, and that sense of the immediate relevance of it, the importance of getting a clear account to the public of what's going on, the privilege of listening and every day to health service leaders talking about what they're doing, and also getting in depth. I came into this job as someone who knows about politics, knows about policy, and knows about change, or at least I think I do, but didn't know much about health. And I found it incredibly fascinating getting into an understanding of health policy and practice issues. I'm still scratching at the surface, I think, but I found it really, really interesting, and and I think I've been able to bring to it perspective. I think if I got one observation, which is not critique of the health service, but it's just an observation, is that most people in the health service are lifers, and so I hope that making up to a certain extent for my lack of health knowledge is the fact that I've got a kind of outsider's perspective, that I bring the perspective from other policy areas and other ways of thinking about change. And I'm finding that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, we talked a couple of days before this about your ideas for the future of the NHS and actually changing the whole structure. Really, you were talking. I mean, I think that's a really interesting debate, because in my 30 years experience of working in the NHS, things didn't change very much, really. We're kind of stuck with systems that were put together in 1948, and nobody's really changed them. You know, the gatekeeper of the GP and the outpatient clinic and the operating list. But we live in, you know, everything else has changed, but the NHS sort of plows on. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I mean, the first thing I want to say is that, and I'm actually going to write something about this in the next couple of weeks, and I won't be the first person to write about it by any means, but the one good thing about the last 2 years has been the acceleration of innovation. And some really important things have happened that we do need to hold on to. I'll give a few examples. Home diagnosis. You know, I mean, we have all got used to the idea of opening a package and taking a test and understanding our health status in relation to this illness. Now, there was a bit of that going on before. You know, when I reached a significant birthday, I got my bowel cancer checked through the test package through the post. So, and of course, you know, had cancer screening, cervical cancer screening for many, many years, although not at home. So home testing is a really interesting thing, because if we're going to move towards this kind of diagnostic revolution, if that trial of the blood test, which can identify the most common cancers, you know, if that is successful, we are going to be moving to a world where all of us, I suspect, will be undertaking reasonably regular home diagnostic procedures, and COVID has made that a norm. So that's been interesting. The use of digital has, I think, also been important. I think we've got to recognize that there are some people for whom digital or telephone consultations are perfect and much prefer them. They're much easier. There are others who are less happy with that, and we've got to try to provide a service that gives choice. But having said which, I thought a few weeks ago the government was very misguided in kind of attacking GPs for encouraging people to do phone or digital first. I you know, that flew in the face of the advice that the centre has been giving for many, many years. So digital is another area of progress. Real-time public health information, population health information. Again, really big shift, knowing the health status. Really interesting innovations like the analysis of sewerage water, which obviously can tell you about COVID, but it can tell you about all sorts of other things in terms of the health of localities. Greater collaboration in the health service, replacing the kind of spirit of competition. The growth of things like virtual wards, hospital at home. So a lot of really good things that happened in COVID, and we need to sustain those in, you know, those wartime. It's like, you know, as often happens, war generates misery, but it also generates innovation, and we need to sustain and accelerate those innovations in peacetime. I'm also enthusiastic about the principles that underlie the move to ICSs, to system working. I think there's a loss of confidence in that right now, and I see it as a really important role for the Confederation, because we are the membership organisation for ICSs, to renew people's faith and excitement in that project. And for me, at the very heart of the ICS project is a shift in two directions. So one is the NHS at the moment is not a service that meets need, it's a service that meets demand. And what we learned during COVID in relation to health inequalities should renew our determination to try to make sure that the health service genuinely meets need and doesn't just meet demand, that we kind of address the inverse care law. And again, good practice in COVID, particularly in relation to outreach around vaccination, where we learned pretty quickly there wasn't enough to open vaccination centres. You needed to think about where you put those centres and how you communicated with communities that were harder to reach, less trusting of authority. And then secondly, what ICSs need to be doing is achieving that leftward shift that we've talked about for so long. You know, it goes back to Wanless and way before that, which is how do we move resources out of acute proportionately, I don't mean absolutely, but proportionately, and into community, mental health, prevention, public health. And I think if ICSs can really focus on those two things, population health inequalities, focusing on need and shifting resources upstream, they could be a really exciting development. And then there's a couple of other kind of blue skies ideas that I have got, which I will share with you tonight. But if I do share them with you, you have to understand they're not Confederation policy by any means at all. They're just things that interest me as a kind of policy wonk, and maybe we can come on to that. But I'm already aware this answer is very long, so I'll stop there.
Oh, well, okay, we'll go back to that. But I mean, Malcolm Wriggler's got a good point here. He says in the 1970s, the Royal College of GPs argued that alongside the NHS, we need a huge and sustained education program. Does Matthew agree that this is still needed and we should in future join forces with educators in schools, colleges, and adult education services? I know you're interested in education, so I mean, and that also, I guess, addresses the issue of preventative medicine, because education is part and parcel of that. So what are your thoughts about that, educating the public?
Yeah, my thought is that health policy must be about more than the NHS. I've developed in the Confederation, and we'll unveil these in a few weeks' time, a set of impact objectives. And they're nothing that you wouldn't expect. They're things which we think the NHS needs to achieve if it's going to be successful in the short to medium term. So they're things like better integration of social, physical and mental health care provision, focus on population health, tackling health inequalities, accelerating innovation. But one of them is, and there are 5, one of them is trying to get a better understanding of and a better exploiting the role of the NHS in the productive economy. So I think we get 2 things wrong when we talk about health. One is that we fail to see that the NHS is not simply a place that spends money, but it's also a really significant part of our productive economy. It's the major employer in many areas. It's the major procurer in many areas. Ill health is one of the reasons for productivity differences. So I think it's been estimated that 1/4 of the productivity difference between low productivity areas and high productivity areas is accounted for in health. So if you go to some of the most deprived areas, you'll see that on average, people are retiring from the labour market in their early 50s with ill health. So on the one hand, we've got to understand the health service is an investment, not to mention, of course, that health is the fastest growing global marketplace, not to mention the importance of research and our work with universities. We've got a brand here, actually, that we could be using much more to explore. And on the other hand, we've got to recognise that most of what drives the nation's health isn't to do what happens in the health service. It's what happens in our education system, but it's also what happens in our workplaces, what happens in our welfare system, what happens in public places. Now, those are some of the ideas that have led to this approach to ICSs. My worry at the moment, and the worry that I hear from the system, is that these kind of broader objectives that system working is about, this kind of broader definition of health and the NHS, is in danger of being squeezed out by the most immediate, more immediate concerns, which are the kind of 80 priorities that NHS England sets to drives down into the system. So I want the Confederation to work with ICSs to remember that broader vision, because we will not improve the health of the nation, and we will not get people to fully understand the value of the health service if we only think about health as being what the NHS spends. Sure,
and that raises all sorts of issues about inequalities and so on, which is something the RSM is going to be focusing on this year. Ian Rickard's got a good question, because you mentioned, the global marketplace for health, and here, Ian says, are we heading towards the NHS being taken over by private equity and private insurance firms? Thinking of healthcare changes bill last November and Mr. Sunak's recent trip to California in December, are we going to be told that the bank is bust and we have to privatize? That's quite a good question.
I mean, no, I would say that concerns about privatization are, I think, unfounded right now. In fact, if anything, we're moving away from the kind of competitive framework in which if you have a competitive framework, which is what, of course, was created by the Labour government that I was advising, then obviously that creates a momentum behind privatisation, because people say, well, look, if you're separating purchasing and providing and you're competing, well, then shouldn't anybody be able to compete? Now, as we're moving towards a more collaborative way of working, provider collaborative system working, actually that takes a lot away of them. It takes away a lot of the momentum from privatisation. And indeed, as we saw in the last few days, it required government to kind of intervene, NHSE to intervene and instruct commissioners to use the private sector right now because of the issue of backlogs and lack of capacity in hospitals, partly for the reasons that we've already explored. Mm-hmm. I myself don't really see the issue about provision, partly because, as we all know, large parts of what we do in the health and care system already private sector. GPs, many GPs are private contractors, and of course, not the care system. And there are whole parts of, for example, acute mental health provision, addiction provision, etc., which are private sector or third sector. So I'm not really that worried about that, as long as we stick to the core principles of a service that provides to people equally on the basis of need. I think the risk goes all the way back to Margaret Thatcher and what she had wanted to do, which was tax incentives for people to opt out. And given the fact that you can wait a year, 2 years, and the fact there has been a growth in people opting for private insurance, that is the risk, it seems to me. It's not private provision, it's that people who can afford it decide to go private. And that's one of the reasons why we must prioritize addressing that backlog and giving people the reassurance that the service they get from the NHS is not only first rate, which it generally is, but also it's timely. However, it's kind of interesting, I think, to note that in Australia, they had just such a system of giving people tax breaks, tax incentives to opt into the private health system. What's happened in Australia in the last few months, partly because the top has come off that long period of Australian economic growth. They were the only country in the world, I think, that didn't have a dip during the global after the global economic crisis. As the economy has plateaued, and what's actually happened is a lot of people have said that have handed back their tax incentive and say they want to opt back into the state system. So, the reality is, when it comes to healthcare, it just costs a lot of money. And it costs a lot of money for nations, whether or not it's paid for by the private or the public sector. And we all know that the most expensive health system in the world is a largely private system in America, or a very mixed system in America. But it costs a lot for individuals, and health insurance is expensive. So I think that the thing we should be focused on when we worry about losing the NHS is not the fact that we might use private sector to provide certain services at certain times, as we have always done. It is that we get to the point where middle-class people who've got enough money say the NHS does not provide me with a sense of security that I want, and therefore I'm willing to splash out my own money in order to get a better service.
Yeah, sounds a bit like education, doesn't it, in private schools? I want to move away from health because we'd love to talk about the RSA and also come back to Tony Blair. But Cecilia Amin, who's a CBE, like you, a CBE, so we definitely better ask her question. Hi, Matthew. Good to hear from you in your new role. She'd like to know your view on long-term workforce strategy in view of the current challenges concerning vaccination protocols. I mean, this is a big issue, isn't it? Because you are going to lose some staff if you force them to get vaccinated, for sure.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a short-term issue. Yeah. As I said earlier, a very difficult short-term issue that I'm quite concerned about, but it is a short-term issue. The long-term issue is that we need proper workforce planning, and some of you will know that the Confed, amongst others, has been pushing for amendments to the NHS and Care Bill to require more regular and publicly published workforce planning. That's been fiercely resisted, mainly by the Treasury, because the Treasury doesn't want to publish workforce plans, because when you publish a workforce plan, it immediately generates the price tag. But we've been pushing very hard for that. And as I said some time ago, we would have found it easier to cope with what's happened over the last 2 years had we not gone into it with 100,000 vacancies. So yes, we need better, more accurate, more regularly updated, and more publicly open workforce planning. I think the onus now, actually is going to shift to systems. And one of the things we'll be doing at the Confederation is working with ICSs as they develop workforce strategies. And going back to a point I was making earlier, if we think about this, I think there are kind of 3 levels of ambition here. So the lowest level of ambition, which is still really, by the way, ambitious in comparison to where we are now, is that ICSs have good workforce strategies for the NHS. The second level of ambition, which I really hope people will get to, is actually we have a workforce strategy for health and care together. And it included in that thinking more creatively about common pathways into health and care careers, and making it easier to move around within the health and care system. But actually, I think the big ambition is to have health and care-led workforce strategies as part of broader local labour market strategies. So working with local enterprise partnerships, working with local authorities, because health and care are going to be the biggest local employer. And also, as I said earlier, health and care are a significant factor in employability, because there are lots of people who aren't working because they're sick and waiting for operations, and there are people who can't work because they're not getting the social care support that they need for themselves or for their families. So I really hope we'll move to a world where in systems we have health workforce strategies, which are inside health and care workforce strategies, which are inside local labour market strategy.
Okay, let's switch a little bit to the story of you and the RSA. I mean, you're a change merchant, and the RSA had dramatically changed in the 15 years that you were there. I went round that rather amazing building a few months ago, and I thought it was fantastic. It's got amazing history, hasn't it? A 250-year history, something like that, and it's a really interesting organization. Can you talk us through how you changed it and why you changed it and what the benefits of the change were?
Wow. I mean, I could spend hours on that, but I'm not going to. I'll try and do it I'll really try and be disciplined and do it in 2 or 3 minutes. So I guess I would really identify 2 things. One is something that I like to bring to every organization and that I'm trying to bring to the Confederation right now, which is that when I went to the RSA, my predecessor actually got things back on an even keel. Her predecessor had got this organization almost to a state of bankruptcy, and she'd done well to achieve stability. But it was a relatively kind of low level stability, in the sense that when I went to the RSA and I asked people why they did what they did, they would tell me what they did. And I would have to say to them, no, that's not the question. The question I ask is, why are you doing what you're doing? And they would then tend to describe what they were doing again. And I would again say, no, but why? So I think that the first thing I brought to the RSA was saying, why are we doing what we're doing? What are we trying to achieve here? And wanting to reassert that we were an Enlightenment organization. Obviously, the Enlightenment has now got a very mixed reputation because of our recognition of the nature of oppression and racism that accompanied Enlightenment thought. But nevertheless, the kind of principles of the Enlightenment, even if they weren't adhered to in the original Enlightenment, but we were an Enlightenment organization. We were around the promulgation of those core Enlightenment values. And that therefore, when we thought about the different things we did in the RSA, the research, the events, and all of that, that what we were doing was trying to reach as many people as possible with the best possible ideas to develop the best possible research projects, which were always oriented to trying to achieve impact around our goals. And look, every organization has to do this. It's a long time since I was at university, but still probably one of the most useful ideas I ever heard was an idea from the German sociologist Max Weber. And Weber wrote about bureaucracy. He was the first person, really, one of the first people to write about bureaucracy, to recognize what it was. And he was actually a fan of bureaucracy in many ways. But one of the characteristics he said of bureaucracy is that bureaucracies have 2 types of rationality. Procedural rationality, which is a rationality of rules, and substantive rationality, which is a rationality of ends. And he said it is a tendency of all organizations for procedural rationality to drive out substantive rationality. So in other words, people in organizations end up doing things because those are the rules, rather than because that's what we're ultimately trying to achieve. So one of the things when you come into an organization from the outside you need to do, and one of the reasons you shouldn't stay in an organization too long, maybe I did stay at the RSA too long, I don't know, is you need that refreshing moment of saying, well, hang on, why are we doing this? What's it for? So I brought that, and just asking that question then led to all sorts of other kind of changes. If we want to get ideas across, why are we just doing events in a room, and why are we not filming them, and why are we not thinking of the best ways for people to watch that, which led to us developing products and millions of people watched RSA events online all around the world. But also, and this is the second thing, probably the thing I'm proudest of was that we have a fellowship in the RSA, and there'll be RSA fellows on this call, and I always thought the fellows was the strongest part of the RSA, 13,000 by the time I left. What I inherited was an organization that was basically writing to people and more or less saying to them, you've been chosen for a minor honor by Prince Philip. congratulations. And so when I went and met fellows when I first started, they were, on the one hand, rather confused as to why they've been given this honour, and on the other hand, rather confused because they didn't really, as they often said to me, I don't really know anything about the arts. Well, actually, of course, the RSA isn't an arts organisation. Its full name is Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce. But, you know, we're not an arts organisation. We're a kind of enlightenment social change organisation. So I had to embark on the process of saying, look, we are no longer going to pretend that becoming a fellow of the RSA is some kind of status symbol. You know, it is not an achievement. It is not an award for past achievements, an invitation for future engagement. Now, we had 27,000 fellows when I said that. And I remember people in my organization literally actually in tears in the fellowship department when I said, look, we're going to move away from this. Because they said, look, status is the reason people join. And the reason we are afloat financially is because fellows pay their annual subscriptions. And I said, yeah, but we cannot be an authentic and effective organization if our starting point is to recruit people on false pretenses. So we went through that. I think the fellowship fell by about 1,500, and then it started to rise again. And then by the time I left, it was between 30 and 31,000. And by that time, the fellows were fellows because they shared our values, much more so. Not all of them, of course, and we were a broad church, but they shared our values. The level of engagement, I mean, the only person who worked on fellowship engagement when I started was somebody who went around the country organising events, most of which were attended by non-fellows. By the time I left, we had a large team of people who worked with fellows. We had a venture fund for fellows activities, which spent £100,000 plus every year backing small fellows initiatives. Fellow engagement was every part. And also, you said you went to the house. The house was redesigned in order to create spaces for fellows to talk and share projects and things like that. So, I was pleased about that because it was a risk. But I just, if you as an organization are doing something, however understandably, because it's necessary for your business model or whatever, but ultimately it undermines your authenticity and means that you can't be straight about who you are and what you do. Well, you've got to change it. Otherwise one day you'll be exposed, or just you won't get satisfaction from what you're doing day to day.
So where does your appetite for change come from, Matthew? I mean, you didn't go to McKinsey's or any business school. You kind of went from university more or less into politics. And I mean, what advice would you give? Doctors need to embrace change more than they do, I think. I think we certainly need to at the RSM and across the NHS, as we've discussed. I mean, where did you get this appetite, this kind of passion for changing things? And what advice would you give to younger doctors who might be listening to this program in terms of how they can kind of get this too?
Yeah, wow. Look, I think the two things really is the one that I've said, which is just be willing to ask yourself why you're doing what you're doing. Be willing to notice those moments when you think, why am I doing this? Or this isn't right, or couldn't this be different? We all have those moments every day, and a lot of the time we block them out because it feels undermining. But actually, that's a really important part of it, is asking yourself why you're doing what you're doing and letting those voices of doubt come in and then processing them and thinking about them. And then secondly, I think it's about seeing how difficult change is and having a theory of change. It's an overused phrase, but change is difficult, but there are ways to make it easier, but it requires patience. It requires respect for other people, because when we get to that kind of Damascene moment, when we want things to change, other people haven't reached that same Damascene moment. So getting other people on board means listening to them, understanding them. It means understanding what Robert Kagan calls immunity to change. All systems have immunity to change. That's why they are in an equilibrium. And when we try to achieve change, what we're trying to do, really important change, is shift the equilibrium point to a new equilibrium point. So it's not just a short-term intervention, it's a shift in the way the system works, the organization works. And the reason we have a suboptimal equilibrium in any situation is there is this immunity to change. And so understanding that immunity to change. I'll give you one example of that, which is personal, initially. So many years ago, I went to a kind of rather weird mass cognitive behavioral therapy thing. It was run by a slightly cultish organization called Landmark Forum, which keeps changing its name every few years because it keeps being exposed as being a bit of a cult. Anyway, I went along. We were all there because either we were doing something we shouldn't be doing, you know, philandering or drinking or taking drugs or being in debt or whatever, or we weren't doing things we should be doing, like fulfilling ourselves, pursuing our musical ambitions, setting up a business, doing amazing things at work, whatever it was. We were all there because of this stuff, right? I'm not going to tell you what my thing was. Anyway, we went through the weekend, and I wouldn't recommend it in many ways because it was a bit cultish and it was all like, you know, being locked in a room for 14 hours and not eating and being shouted at. But what was interesting about it was right at the end of the second day, just before we were allowed to go, we all had to get up and say what our story was. So we'd spend these 2 days working on what is your story? What is your story? And everybody got up and then one line to say what their story was. And every single person, what they said was a version of, I'm doing this or I'm not doing this because it's hard being me. Now, I think we all do that. So I think one of the reasons we don't stop doing things we shouldn't do, or we don't do things we ought to do, is because we say to ourselves, you know, it's hard being me. And, you know, it is hard being me. Being a human being is hard for all sorts of reasons. That's a different philosophical conversation, but nevertheless. But my view is organizations have exactly the same thing. So just as we as individuals mobilize that story of it's hard being me to excuse the fact that we don't stop doing things we shouldn't do or do things we should, organizations are the same. And that's why it's always the cover-up that kills you, by the way. Because when you make a mistake and you realize you ought to admit it, whether you, I don't know, you're the Metropolitan Police or tabloid newspapers or politicians or whatever, we all make mistakes. But at the point where it's being discovered, and the choice is, well, do I fess up? Do I admit to it? Do I acknowledge it? Or do I cover up? That's when that story comes in and goes, yeah. But you know, it's so hard being a member of parliament, so hard being a politician, or it's so hard being a tabloid journalist and having to generate headlines all the time, or it's so hard being a police officer, being put under, being abused and under pressure and all of that. So when we're thinking about why change is difficult, and we're thinking about immunity to change, one of the little elements to look at is, what is it, the story that people tell themselves individually, in teams, in organizations, which stops them being willing to look at something clearly and say, actually, you know, it's not good enough, it needs to change. And that's just one element of it. I could talk about change for hours. But so I would say what it is that drives the desire for change is this questioning spirit, plus an interest in change itself and a patience in terms of analyzing what the barriers to change are and developing the strategies, the political, the organizational, the learning, psychological strategies which enable change to happen.
We've found at the RSM, you can come up with the strategies, but often it's the implementation that's difficult, and maybe that's resistance. But actually, that's a great answer. And I want to, because there's so many questions coming in, they're piling in, and it's a bit random, the ones I'm choosing. But actually, Malcolm Stoddard wants to take you back to Tony Blair. He says, could Matthew comment on Tony Blair's recent New Year's honour in view of the fact that a very large number of signatories oppose it? So that kind of, let's go back to Tony and Gordon Brown. We've all watched those amazing programs about them, the Brown Blair years, and kind of we've all lived through it, but you were actually in the thick of it, to use a famous expression.
Yeah, I think Tony deserved that honor, in as much as I think most people will say he is one of the three most significant leaders this country has had since the Second World War, Attlee, Thatcher and Blair. He's certainly, by a country mile, the most successful leader the Labour Party has ever had. I think Iraq will always be a stain on his record. I think that, and multiple reviews, I think, have more or less concluded this, that despite lots of mistakes, he was well-meaning in his intentions in Iraq. There wasn't some secret motive there. He genuinely believed it was vital to support America, and he genuinely believed that the interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq would lead to those countries becoming better countries. But that doesn't excuse the lack of preparation. It doesn't excuse the hubris. It doesn't excuse the failure to challenge the Americans more effectively. It doesn't excuse the exaggeration of the case. But, you know, nevertheless, this is a man who won 3 elections. This is a man, and, you know, I'm not going to bore you all, but it's all available on Twitter and various other places. But, you know, there is a very, very long list of achievements, not least of which was, you know, we didn't have winter crises in the later years of. Now, I talk to people like, oh, well, isn't this Omicron? It's just another winter crisis. The NHS always has winter crisis. Well, you know, actually, it didn't. From about 2005 to 2011, before austerity kicked in, we weren't. I mean, I think there was 1 or 2 years when there was particularly bad kind of flu epidemics, but generally we got away from the idea of about waiting lists remarkably low. The targets were hit. And, you know, the minimum wage and, you know, gay marriage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it was an enormous, I think Britain domestically became a significantly more progressive and inclusive country. Child poverty fell under Blair and Brown more rapidly than it fell in any other country, any other developed world country in history. More rapidly, fell by 1 million children were lifted out of poverty. So, you know, I think the domestic record is proud. I think Iraq is Iraq, and, you know, some people will always believe that Blair had other motives. I just think he got it terribly wrong. But I certainly think his stature, his work, and the work actually he's done since leaving office in areas ranging from, you know, religious tolerance to work he's done on sport in the north, to the way he's continued to try to support the progressive wing of the Labour Party. So, you know, there are some people who hate Tony Blair and always will hate Tony Blair, and I get that. But I don't begrudge him his honour at all.
Yeah, and he did pour money into the NHS that made a big difference in the 2000s. I'm holding up your book here because we're running out of time, actually, but just briefly, do we have to work? And I've been reading it this afternoon. I think it's fascinating. I love the pictures in it, and the very bold text works for somebody of my age. But in a nutshell, give us the reason you wrote that.
Yeah, so I got interested in work because Theresa May commissioned me a few years ago to do a report on the future of work, which is kind of partly in the context of the gig economy, and I really enjoyed that and generated lots of recommendations. The government accepted them all and implemented some of them, but then Theresa May lost office and we're still waiting for the rest to be implemented. We've been waiting for an employment bill for 4 years now, but anyway, fingers crossed it will one day come. So I was pleased with that piece of work, and I then did another piece of work for the government. I worked part-time as the Director of Labour Market Enforcement. So I got really interested in work and the future of work, and future work is probably the single biggest program at the RSA which I helped to create, and is still there and really, really good work. So if you're interested in future work, go to the RSA website and look at that great work. I wanted to write this book because the core idea that I got across in that report for Theresa May, there was lots and lots of small recommendations, but the report was called Good Work. And what I hoped I achieved in that was that I got into the kind of public debate that we shouldn't just care about the quantity of work, which was all we really worried about when I was in government, you know, unemployment, getting people into work. Any job is better than no job. We should also care about the quality of work. And we kind of know what the characteristics of good quality work is, and it is about terms and conditions, but it's also about things like purpose, things like autonomy, things like teamwork, quality of management, flexibility. So we kind of know what the criteria for good work is, although, of course, everyone wants different things out of work. So that idea of quality of work, and the government committed, although again, we're kind of waiting for this to happen, but committed to measuring quality of work, reporting on quality of work. We know that poor quality work, by the way, has got a major health implications. You know, if you have poor quality work, you're much more likely to go off work sick or to leave your job. But in this book, which is very short, it's part of a series that I edit for Thames and Hudson called the Big Ideas series, just kind of 10,000 words, provocative ideas. I wanted to take that notion of good work and look at it, take it to its logical conclusion. So what I do in the book is I say, if we were really committed to the idea that all work should be good quality work, what are the deeper implications for that, going beyond all sorts of specific incremental improvements that we might make in kind of labour law? And you'll have to read the book to see the full argument. Basically, in the headlines, I say that the things we need to look at, I root them, if I can remember them, there are 4 C's. Competition, because actually in the end, nobody wants to do a job just because they want to compete. It has to be because there has to be a broader, deeper purpose. authority. I don't know where that C is, but it was control. That was it. Control, because actually people don't want to work in a situation where they're told what to do and they have no voice and no rights and no autonomy. The third C was, I can't see. I wrote it 6 months ago, and I remember the fourth C. The fourth C is a cognitive bias, which is that we have a tendency to think the only good jobs are jobs that involve abstract analytical skills. And medicine, the profession is slightly different from that, but that's generally our view of the world. And I wrote in the book, it's really important actually to have a commitment to respecting work of the heart, care work, but also manual work. It's a big problem for our economy that we haven't tended to prize those kind of skills. So yeah, so what I said was, if we want good work for all, we're going to have organizations that always do things for an ultimate purpose, not just for competition, organizations that disperse control through the organization. And I'm going to think of the third C, but I haven't got it. Yeah, you holding up the book, you'll be able to find it. But anyway, there is
I'll find it afterwards, as soon as we're through this. Yeah. And then we'll put it on the website. Matthew, we're running out of time. We started a tiny bit late, so we'll finish a tiny bit late. I wanted to kind of finish by asking you, what's your proudest achievement? You've done so much. Looking back, what is your golden nugget of achievement?
I do have a tendency to be a little bit too open. I think, to be honest, I think just kind of sticking at it, really. I said earlier that, I don't think it's easy, actually, being a human being. And I actually think one of the kind of massive issues, this is a much bigger kind of question, I've written a lot about it in the past, but fatalism is a part of the human condition, and religion used to help us deal with it. And because religion has now become so much weaker for many of us in our lives and in our institutions and our culture, I don't think we know what to do with kind of fatalistic characteristics of the human condition. Anyway, that's a different story. But I think for me, I had a bit of a kind of slightly kind of fractured and slightly unhappy childhood. Not terrible, don't get me wrong, but I went to 7 different primary schools and parents split and all that kind of stuff. And I'm quite an anxious person, really. I'm not somebody who finds life easy. I do all this media stuff, but if I make a mistake, I'll tell you a little story. I know we're running out of time, but this is a good story. It's about famous people, so you'll like this story. So I'm good friends with a guy called Adrian Giles, who's we support the same appalling football team. And
good man.
And Adrian was telling me that when he was working on ITV doing the football commentary, he did a match, I think it was England-Poland, and he said something to the England fans. He said, there they are celebrating St. George's Day, and it wasn't St. George's Day. St. George's Day was the day earlier. And there was, because he was, at that time, Adrian was subject to a lot of critique because he was very highly paid, and his morning show wasn't going very well. There was a kind of pile-in, this idiot, who's being paid millions of quid, he can't even get St. George's Day, right? Anyway, he was traveling away from the event, in a bus, and he was with a famous footballer. I'm going to take the risk of naming him anyway, with Roy Keane.
Right.
And Roy Keane noticed that Adrian wasn't speaking. And Roy said to Adrian, "How long?" And Adrian knew exactly what he meant. And Adrian said, 24 hours? And Roy said, "Yeah, it's 48 with me." And what he meant was, that's how long it took to be able to even kind of function when you made a mistake. And I'm like that, when I make a mistake, when I get something wrong, or when I think I might have got something wrong, I go into paroxysms of anxiety. I want to disappear and curl up in a ball and behave deeply. I mean, honestly, talk to my wife, I'm not an easy person to live with. And so I suppose, the thing I'm most proud of, as I'm in my 60s now, is I've somehow managed to kind of overcome my demons and keep going. And, that's kind of it, really. I don't, the CBE is just funny, really. I've got a picture of Princess Anne in my toilet, and she's great, Princess Anne. I think she's a really fantastic person. I love getting to know her when I was at the RSA. But and for me, it's almost it's an honour, but it's slightly amusing as well. And having run the RSA and all that kind of stuff. But actually, I guess when I need those moments, we all have those moments, don't we? When we need to kind of say, "Look, you're okay. It's all right." when I have those moments, what I say to myself is, you know, you've kept on going. Is it Saul Bellow, Humboldt's gift? He says at the end, all you could say of Humboldt on his dying day, on his deathbed, was that he paid his dues. Now, I'm not sure I've paid my dues, but I've kept on going. That's I guess, the thing I'm most proud of.
Well, you've achieved amazing things, and thank you so much for that insight into so many things. Don't go away. I just got a few announcements to make, because we're very proud of our In Conversation series, and tonight's been brilliant with you. Such an easy person to interview. Next week, we've got Phil Hammond, the comedian, and Simon Wesley is going to interview him. Simon, being a psychiatrist, should do a good job. The week after that, which is the 26th of January, I'm back again, and I'll be interviewing Professor Gillian Leng, who actually heads up NICE. In fact, I think it's her last week at NICE, so she'll be telling us about her NICE, and also, sadly, her husband, who died, Sir Paul Cosford, died very young, age 60, I think, only a few months, about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. And then we've got a second spotlight on long COVID on Thursday, the 20th of January. There's a small cost associated with that, but that helps us keep things going at the Royal Society of Medicine. We will be asking you for a small donation if you've enjoyed this program, because of, as I pointed out before, we've lost a lot of money during the lockdown because our building's been closed. So anything that you can do to help us and support us. But let's go back to our brilliant communicator this evening. Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time and trouble to spend an hour with me. We'll put this on YouTube in a few days' time, so it will be there. And let's keep in touch. In fact, I was going to try and recruit you to join the RSM as a member. If we, I'll get back to you on that.
Count me in, Roger.
Take care, everybody. Good night. Have a good one. Bye.